Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's show where I will have another guest on. This time we will be discussing, though, the relationship between the United States and Israel. So we will be unpacking that a little bit. Think that's incredibly relevant. I think you guys would agree based on where we are at with the conflicts in the Middle East. And Israel's role and ostensibly, therefore, our role in these conflicts. Now, guys, quick show update. I'm actually going to be scrapping the midweek mailbag to actually provide you guys with more content. So what I mean by that is instead of doing 2 episodes a week, one longer one on usually Sunday, and then another one in the middle of the week, I will be keeping the Sunday episode, guys. So the longer form Unpacking, that will stay. But throughout the week, I'm going to do shorter 5 to 15 minute clips, reacting to some different content that you guys, the viewers, are sending me. So there will be a slight change there, but nothing too dramatic. But let's jump into the quick hits of the week, starting with some positive news from the progressive community coming out of New York City. So Zohran Wins, if you guys probably heard about him in the news, but if not, he is a democratic socialist, so a progressive, someone who sits on the left wing and shares a lot of policy positions I agree with and progressives agree with. He has won the New York City mayoral primary, beating out Democrat establishment candidate Andrew Cuomo. Now, guys, why this is such big news is it kind of sets up this future split in the Democratic Party between what voters want and what Democrats generally propose. So you have guys what are called like Democrat or establishment Democrats, corporate Democrats, whatever you want to call them, who take these huge super PAC donations from the same lobbying groups and billionaires and millionaires that the Republicans overwhelmingly take that money from, right? In this case, going back to the Democratic Party, Andrew Cuomo takes those same kind of large donations, whereas Mondani, as a progressive, as a democratic socialist, he does not take those large PAC donations and is pushing progressive policies. So we have, once again, that establishment wing versus the left kind of up-and-coming progressive wing. Now, also, guys, just in general, increasing taxes and on the rich and preferably taxing wealth on the rich and redistributing resources to better serve society is a nightmare scenario for those at the top. They do not want to pay their fair share in taxes. But one of the things I've loved, guys, following Mondani through this is how he has not shied away from the critics. And I think it's a mistake that Democrats have made historically in trying to kind of defend themselves as like, I'm not a communist or I'm not a lefty lunatic or whatever. Democrats, it does not matter what your policy positions are. The Republicans are going to call you names. That's where we're at in 2025. Get used to it. Stop trying to pearl clutch and be like, no, my policies are actually very centrist. Do the policies that the people elected you to do and stop worrying about being name called by Republican like Congress members or the president. Who cares? You do not serve them. You serve your constituents. I feel like I say that nonstop, but it doesn't seem to be clicking in some of the heads of our elected representatives. Now, there is predictable fallout from this, what I would call predictable, which was Islamophobia run amok. So it is one thing, guys, to criticize his policies and disagree with them for whatever reason. Would love to debate you with that if you do disagree. But the Islamophobia was far more pronounced in the critiques in a lot of ways. So I'm going to read some quotes from huge right-wing figures, starting with Donald Trump Jr., so the president's son here, who said, "I'm old enough to remember when New Yorkers endured 9/11 instead of voting for it." So in his, I guess, pea-sized brain, I don't know what he's doing here, but he thinks if you're a Muslim and you're elected into office, you must be involved in 9/11. All right, I guess that makes any logical sense. Once again, guys, that's just Islamophobia. That is racism, obviously. He is making that statement based on someone's background. That's it. Exclusively like the fact he is Muslim. Now, a far-right influencer, extreme far-right influencer, influencer Charlie Kirk also said this: 24 years ago, a group of Muslims killed 2,753 people on 9/11. Now a Muslim socialist is on pace to run New York City. So guys, Muslims make up about a quarter of the world's population. It is such a lazy argument to point to a small group in one event and say, okay, therefore everyone in that group must be, I guess, some kind of violent terrorist. Kind of, that's what he's implying here. I don't think that as a white male, he would want to play that game necessarily. We got Timothy McVeigh. We have the Columbine shooting. We have just far-right extremists nonstop. We have the people who just murdered Melissa Hortman. So if we are going to go ahead and say like a small group and then apply that to everyone, guys, that is an insane argument. It is lazy. It makes no sense. You wouldn't do that for white men or white women, but it seems in minority groups that is constantly a tactic. So let's look at what these specific immigrants, for instance, did. These, Mexican immigrants, for instance, and then let's say, oh, all Mexicans are that way. Let's go on Fox News, play these clips of, young black people going in and vandalizing a store and then espouse that to say all of them are doing it. That is a typical tactic that, once again, is just lazy and it's baked in racism. That's why they do it. It's a lazy argument and it's easy to do. Now, I do not want to let the Democrats off the hook, specifically Kirsten Hillebrand, who currently actually has protests outside of her office at the time of this recording in response to her comments. But she basically insinuated that Mondani was somehow a jihadist or a terrorist. Once again, just rampant Islamophobia. Guys, this is reminding me a lot about how the country reacted after 9/11 and how, unfortunately, what happened in that time is a lot of people united over Muslim hatred. And once he was elected, this is what you saw raging all across social media, is Muslim hatred, which is just disgusting. But I think it brings into perspective really how much further we need to go in accepting and understanding different minority groups, because we are clearly nowhere near where we need to be. Now, closing up with this story, guys, the election for New York City mayor is on November 2nd. And Zohran's biggest opponent will likely be Eric Adams, who will be running as a independent, and he's an incumbent there in New York City. And this is going to be, guys, a huge nationwide election. Not only because it's New York City, the most powerful city really in the world, definitely in the United States, but it's another showdown of the establishment of the Democratic Party versus the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. And it could really be a turning point and set the stage for the 2026 primaries and a potential changing of the guard for the Democratic Party. So super exciting news. Before I jump into some depressing news coming from the Supreme Court. So the first Supreme Court story I'm going to talk about here is they upheld a ban on Medicaid funding for Planned Parenthood. Guys, it's an absolute disastrous decision. It was a 6-3 ruling along ideological lines in favor of South Carolina, which now allows the state to deny Medicaid funding to Planned Parenthood, which, guys, that essentially means Medicaid recipients can no longer go to Planned Parenthood as their health care provider. Now, guys, the conversation around Planned Parenthood tends to always talk about abortion, which my stance is abortion is healthcare. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. No, people are not doing post-birth abortions or crazy nonsense that is thrown out there. Commonly, when women get abortions, particularly if it's late in the term, it's because the baby or the mother's life is at risk. That is the overwhelming reality of the situation. But I'm going to put that to the side. I think that deserves more unpacking. But guys, Planned Parenthood provides a wide array of services to their parents. So this includes providing birth control, STD or STI treatment and screening. They also provide cancer screenings and just general wellness visits and counseling services. So the rhetoric is always around abortions, but all of these services are likely to diminish or go away in certain areas with this decision. So the overall impact, guys, of defunding a program like Planned Parenthood and some of the things that I mentioned that they provide, you guys can, your wheels are probably already turning about what this would mean. So obviously, fewer contraception options. So what that would lead to is more unplanned pregnancies, especially unplanned teen pregnancies. We would also have more sexually transmitted diseases or sexually transmitted infections spread as well due to the lack of protection there. There's going to be a delay in cancer diagnosis and treatment among people who rely on these services. Millions would lose low-cost reproductive and preventative care. And what it would also do, guys, is it's going to put a strain on other providers who would now need to provide care as Planned Parenthood gets defunded and they no longer have the resources or ability to care for their patients. And that is going to lead ultimately, guys, to shortages and longer wait times for everyone. And also higher downstream costs for states. Because, guys, if you don't treat and catch things early, the price to treat it is more expensive in the long run. And I'm sure, as you guys can predict, this will impact people as this administration is consistently targeting the people at the bottom of the society. It's really gross the way they are doing this. This, once again, would attack people who need the most assistance in society. Planned Parenthood, guys, serves over 2 million people yearly. And those are mostly people who are either, low income, uninsured, or underinsured in our terrible, broken healthcare system. And those are the other people who are going to be most impacted, guys. It's not just people who are uninsured, underinsured, or from low income, but specifically those groups are made up of women of color, young people, rural populations who struggle to access, they don't have as many clinics available, and LGBTQ plus individuals will hurt the most from cutting funding to Planned Parenthood. Now, speaking of cutting programs like Planned Parenthood and Medicaid, we also had seniors in wheelchairs this week protesting Medicaid cuts who were met with zip ties by Capitol Police. So you guys can see the clip now, but I guess they were in such a threat that a host of zip ties need to be taken out, and we need to zip tie our senior citizens in wheelchairs in the United States of America. My question, if you're applauding this, what is the right way you want people to protest when they're not being listened to? Right? So we go in the voting booths, we go and we elect our representatives to do the policies that are best for us. Then they get in office and they are more concerned about fundraising and their own egos than doing anything to help, for instance, senior citizens and these Medicaid cuts. How do you want people to protest? Because if you're not okay with a peaceful protest on Capitol Hill by people in wheelchairs and you're more in favor of them being taken out and zip tied, I just don't think you believe in the First Amendment. You just don't think people should be able to protest in general, despite these hardworking Americans, many of them working their whole life. They're at the end of their life, and then their health care is basically going to be taken out from under them. That's just, I really, guys, at this moment, I do not think that enough of our fellow Americans out there truly fathom the gravity of these cuts and the impact they will have on so many Americans until these cuts actually impact people they know or themselves directly. I think we have a lack of empathy entirely in this country right now. And I think, unfortunately, we saw this a lot with COVID, sadly, is people didn't take COVID seriously until a friend or family member or themselves got really sick or unfortunately lost their lives. I think we have that applying over and over again to different things. And I think that will apply here. Like if I have health insurance, right, and I have good coverage, I don't necessarily care about the millions who may be affected by Medicaid cuts. What I ask you to do, if that is your mindset, or you know someone who is in that mindset, is to have a little bit of empathy and also understand that you are far closer to losing your health care than somehow being in this 1% who is taking joy in doing these cuts for millions of Americans who need them. Just really disappointing. Moving into the next story, another Supreme Court decision here. Guys, I wish it was getting better, but it is getting worse. So the Supreme Court gave Trump a win on birthright citizenship. And I want to break this down for you guys a little bit because this can be a little confusing. Maybe it was just confusing for me as I read through. But it does not mean, what I want to clarify is it does not mean that the legality, they have not yet, let me phrase it this way. They have not yet ruled on the legality of Trump's full executive order on birthright citizenship. Okay. That was not what was ruled. What was ruled, or what was decided here, is they ultimately ruled that, they limited the ability of federal judges to issue universal injunctions, which are basically like blocks. So executive orders, therefore, now are allowed to go into effect until a lawsuit is specifically brought up by an individual state, rather than one state bringing it up and then that blocking it universally. And now things, guys, so if someone sues or there's a lawsuit, it needs to make its way to the Supreme Court and puts a bunch of proverbial legal red tape in front of states who want to sue because of this ruling now. And guys, to work things through the courts could take years in some cases. And it's going to create inequities between states who just simply decide to not file certain injunctions when executive orders are made. So you may see a bigger, splitting of the policies between what you see in red states and blue states. Now, guys, I am not okay with that. I'm not okay with citizens in red states suffering, particularly those who did not vote for this, but that may be where we are heading with this ruling. Now, the bigger issue, guys, is not even on with this now, in this moment in time. It's not specific about birthright citizenship. What this decision ultimately does is it opens the door to future illegal and unconstitutional executive orders because the lower courts can no longer block it, and it needs to go through all of this red tape to end up being blocked. So, or being ruled unconstitutional or illegal, despite, guys, the 14th Amendment, for instance, on birthright citizenship being clear as day and for not being argued for centuries. It's just something that's been accepted, but I guess we want to address this for some reason. I do not want to drop yet another hammer here, guys, but I didn't do a full story of this, but the Supreme Court also ruled that parents could pull kids from public school lessons that are about the LGBTQ plus community. So, guys, the same thing has happened historically in the past. It's not as frequent anymore when there were stories about people of color, right? Historically, it is never a good idea to try to ignore, eliminate, or put to the side marginalized groups who we know exist in society. This is just another abhorrent decision, but that's what happens, guys. The way our Supreme Court is set up, our presidents get to appoint them, and it's only dependent on if anyone retires or if someone passes away while they're serving as a Supreme Court justice. Yes, that is an insane system. That is why we have this crazy ultra-conservative Supreme Court. But that's how it works in the United States. Now, I do want to shout out a quote. I know those were really ultimately 3 devastating Supreme Court decisions, back to back to back, with the Planned Parenthood decision, with basically making Donald Trump even more of a king through weakening the judicial branch and strengthening the power of the executive branch and his ability to do orders, executive orders. And then the pulling kids out of lessons about the LGBTQ plus community. But I do want to shout out this quote I saw. This is, I saw this from YouTube, from @Sane Inje. It says, I've had crunch wraps more supreme than this court. I thought that one made me laugh, and I needed that after the Supreme Court decided to rain terror on us this past week. Now, moving on to story 4. I wish it was getting better, guys. It is not. Story 4 relates to, the polling kids, kind of the attack just in general of the LGBTQ plus community. And this one, guys, is really just disheartening. I don't even understand the point to this. The Trump administration is cutting the LGBTQ plus suicide hotline. So how this had worked historically is individuals could dial 988 and press the number 3. And that would take you to a crisis lifeline that was specialized to deal with the LGBTQ plus community. And this is set, the ban is set to come into effect on July 17th. Now, in terms of what this service has done, it has provided services to approximately 1.3 young people that will now be no longer available. And the individuals working these hotlines had specialized training, and the results have shown to be incredibly highly effective. So they're just getting rid of something that's research-based, effective, and has served over 1 million youth throughout the country, or young people throughout the country. And I don't know in general, guys, how suicide prevention became a bipartisan issue. Once again, particularly when the evidence demonstrated that what they were doing was effective. Sometimes I can't comprehend the decisions that are made. Also, announcing this decision during Pride Month, repulsive, but on brand for this administration. Remember, guys, they came for Juneteenth, saying that we have too many days off on Juneteenth. So the callous nature, the disgusting nature of this administration, I guess should not shock me anymore. Now, the immediate impact of this, so after this was announced, mental health advocates have received an influx in calls, not surprising there. Experts have also argued that this will likely lead to more isolation among members of the LGBTQ plus community and a potential increase in suicide attempts and successful suicides, unfortunately. And guys, this is obviously not the way to treat a growing problem for a group that is 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than the general population. I do want to leave it on this because Congress can still act to overturn this decision. That I don't have much faith in Congress, but that is still an opportunity. And I want to leave you guys with a quote from the Trevor Project. And the Trevor Project is a nonprofit, suicide prevention organization for LGBTQ plus young people. And this is the quote here. I want every LGBTQ plus young person to know that you are worthy, you are loved, and you belong. Despite this heartbreaking news, the Trevor Project's crisis counselors are here for you 24/7, just as we have always been, to help you navigate anything you might be feeling right now. And I just, as an ally, want to emphasize, if you are listening to this and you are part of that community, you are not less of a person just because there is hate in the world. And I hope you know that. I am an ally, and I hope you have additional people, in your life who love you, who, will support and stick up for you. But this is just ultimately going to lead to higher, levels of depression and higher, according to the experts, higher numbers of suicides. I am going to put a link to the Trevor Project in the description, guys, in case you or someone may need some support in the future. Now, guys, that was heavy there, but moving to the 5th story here, guys, we're going to do an Iran conflict update. We have some anti-war protests breaking out in Tel Aviv, demanding a Gaza ceasefire now that there has been a ceasefire agreement with Iran. So the thinking there is a moment in time where it seems like peace is actually on the table. So that is where these anti-war protests, or the crux of these anti-war protests, in Israel. And some of these anti-war protesters have even called on the United States and President Trump to help assist in the negotiations. But the diplomatic path forward is a bit murky, to say the least. Now, while all of this was happening and the ceasefire has been in place, Israel refocused its genocidal mission on Gaza and actually ramped up the level of civilian violence. So at the time of recording on Sunday, June 29th, Israel forces killed at least 45 people in Gaza, including multiple aid seekers. And the report from this, guys, was Israeli officers and soldiers reported that they were directed to shoot unarmed Palestinian civilians seeking aid. So they weren't told to, target Hamas, focus on, violent individuals within Palestine. No, they said shoot unarmed Palestinian civilians seeking aid. I don't know how anyone anymore can be on the side of the Israeli people and what they are doing. Going to get to that more in this episode, obviously. Now, a separate attack, so this is not the 45 dead of people just being gunned down when they're seeking aid. There is a separate Israeli airstrike that claimed 72 additional lives this weekend. So that's where we're at with the genocide in Gaza. It seems like they're ramping up the violence and just taking out mass degrees of people at an even higher rate than, I guess, most recently. Now, Trump said that a ceasefire is possible within the next week. So it's going to be interesting, guys, if that does happen, how quickly it happens. But more importantly, too, is what are the actual terms of the ceasefire, okay? We all want peace, obviously. I am tired of the nonstop just murdering of people. Right? It's out of control and where we're at in the state of the world. But the people, the Palestinian people, deserve a say in this, right? And that is where my concern lies, as I do not think they will. But that last story of the week segues nicely into an interview I did with my friend Sean. We kind of go back quite a bit, but we spent some time unpacking the relationship between the United States and Israel. So I hope you guys enjoy. Hello, guys, and welcome to this special episode where I have another guest on here. We have my friend who, I guess we can say we go back to the sandbox here. But I have my friend Sean here. And Sean, one of the things I tell people is there's people who call me Tim and people who call me Timmy. If you ever reference me as Timmy, you have known me from back in the day, and you are one of those people. So how have you been, man? How are things going? How's life?
I've been good. I'm glad to join you here. I appreciate you reaching out the offer. And yeah, man, it's cool to see that you've been doing your thing, speaking about current events and whatnot. Just, as an everyday citizen, and, that's kind of me as well. I've been getting myself informed here and there. I'm not in it all the time, but I try to keep educated on what's going on in the world. And, that's how we have our positive impact. So,
yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I'm not someone who has done this long term. Me too. I've had a recent, I guess, political awakening. It was COVID for me that really got things moving. So I'm glad, like you said, just everyday people able to break down things from kind of an everyday perspective here. So guys, on today's episode, we are going to be talking about the relationship between the United States and Israel. Definitely a hot button issue considering what's happening now in the Middle East and obviously what has been happening in Gaza more specifically prior to what has happened in Iran. Now, before we jump into the first question, I do want to discuss just some facts and figures in case you guys are unaware of the degree of support we have given Israel basically since the 50s. So this is according to USA Facts, and this is when adjusted for inflation. The United States has sent about $315 billion to Israel since 1951. And this is from 51 to 2022. So that doesn't even include some of the recent money over the past few years, with the vast majority of that money going towards military aid. So Sean, this is my first question for you that we need to unpack a little bit. where does this like US allegiance and a loyalty, like blind loyalty really, it seems, towards Israel come from, despite what we're seeing, in Gaza, for example?
So, in my perspective, there's a few reasons behind this. Going back to the origins of Israel existing in the Middle East, I would say that the United States sees them as a strategic location in a place that they normally wouldn't have much leverage or power. And so, of course, people talk about the petrodollar and the United States military involvement in the Middle East being a part of supporting our access to that. Oil and whatever is going to be a big part of maintaining a strong infrastructure for us at the homeland. And so I think that's part of the relationship. I hear people talk about things like us sharing Western democratic values and whatnot. I think that is a media talking point. I'm not going to say that I know a lot about their political structure, but I've heard and seen things that, and as we can see with how Netanyahu is running things and the public uproar, it brings some of those talking points into question that we see on the news. So for one thing, like I said, the influence on the oil world is part of it. Another part of it, in my perspective, is that they lobby very heavily in the United States. And we have a representative democracy in the United States. And so instead of being in a place where they need to influence, say, 370 million people or however many are in the United States, they've only got to get access to a couple hundred, a couple thousand. And you see that in the way that some of these lobbying groups spend their money. And so if you have someone who is giving you funds and is getting you into a position of power and telling you, hey, all we need you to do is when this key issue comes up, we want you to vote our way, or we want you to represent our cause or whatever. I think that's another one of the main reasons that we see the United States government backing Israel in so many ways, is that I don't want to say control, because that's a very strong word, but they have incredible influence on our political structure. And, someone wants to get reelected, they got to say the right things and vote the right way. So,
Yeah, and I think kind of you're speaking to groups like APAC, and think about how crazy that is, like us trying to be the representative democracy, right? We're supposed to be, theoretically, like this is what we're taught when we're young. We go through, like, America is the best example of democracy, but we know, like, we know that our elections are bought and influenced heavily by dollars. So I would argue, how in the world is that actually a democracy if we, as average people, overwhelmingly know we have a corrupt political system that runs on the dollar? I don't know if you wanted to add to that.
No, I agree on that. I think money is a huge part of our political system. This is something that I don't think is talked a lot about, but when Trump first ran, what was it, back in 2016, part of his big thing was, I am paying for this with my own money, right? And I'm not bought and whatever. And then you come around to this most recent election, he's getting $100 million from a single person who is of Israeli descent, or their citizen. This is Miriam Adelson, I believe her name was. And so it's like, okay, well, if you receive $100 million from a single person, you're doing some horse trading. You know what I mean?
Not to mention, how much he received from Elon Musk as well. And that is like, that's a problem. I agree with you. I think the biggest issue, and we're going to come back to this at the very end of our conversation, but I think our biggest political issue is the money in politics, because you're always going to find some kind of actor who will fill that spot, right? So even if me and you, and I think a lot of average people find this hard to believe, because most people their brains don't function this way. But like a lot of these people, they just want money. There is no incentive to make things better. It is purely, okay, APAC or these lobbying groups gave me this much money, I now service them. I don't care if I cut Medicaid and some of my they don't operate with empathy like that. And I think that's hard for certain people to recognize.
That is for sure a part of it. And And actually, interestingly enough, this brings me to a third point that I was going to make about, their, well, I would say our relationship together and their influence over our political system is, and this might be a little bit of an uncomfortable one, is the Jeffrey Epstein phenomenon. And in my perspective, a guy like that, and he's probably not the only one, but these people are intelligence assets. And it seems that he was a part of a what someone might call like a honeypot scheme, where they get people who are in power positions and they put them in a compromising situation, and if they have evidence of it, guess what, now they're in the pocket. So the payments is a big part of it, yes, getting money, but also there's blackmail type stuff that goes on. And we live in a world where people are willing to do pretty weird stuff in order to get some influence. And I think that's a lot of what that was about. And, he was partnered up with that lady, I think it was Ghislaine Maxwell, or however you pronounce it. And her father was an intelligence asset from, he worked in different governments, but you know where they're coming from. So
No, there's definitely what we have too is the elites just live in an entirely different like world than us. Like there's some intentional bad actors who are you mentioned Tucker Carlson at the beginning. He's an intentional bad actor. He is very intelligent. He is well informed. He, I think, rides the wave and adjusts as needed to make money and become relevant, right? I think JD Vance is also very intelligent. But then I think there are a group of people who are they get in positions that they're not qualified for and have no idea how things operate. And I think there's like two big camps there. But I did want to kind of go back to one of your original, I think you're correct with the military stronghold and the oil. But one of the things that I don't think a lot of people understand is the United States already drills more oil than any other country in the world. What we do is we export it away. So if you want, if the goal is to decrease energy prices domestically, stop exporting so much oil to other countries. But the goal isn't to help me or you with energy prices. It's to enrich the oil executives by getting even more oil that they can then export everywhere in the world. So I don't think enough people know that we already drill more than any other country. We think like we're getting all of this oil from the Middle East at insane levels, which isn't really true. We're overproducing and then we're shipping it also. So I wanted to mention that. And we could also, guys, just fix a lot of this by getting ahead on renewables. That's something that's also confusing to me because that would create a robust industry because there does need to be a mixture. You can't just go full renewables tomorrow. It takes like years, decades of infrastructure building. But if you get ahead on the curve, because it's going to be inevitable, these are non-renewables that we're talking about. So eventually they're going to run out. I also don't understand why we're not getting in front of the curve on renewables when that's going to be inevitable. I didn't know if you had any thoughts on that also.
Yeah, that's one that I'm not really sure on. To be honest, I don't really know what goes into the extraction of oil. With renewables, I think one of the limiting factors is how quickly can we access some of these rare earth minerals that are needed to create things like solar panels and some of the batteries and whatever for things like Tesla engines. So I don't have a deep understanding on that, but I would imagine that's part of the influence on the pace with which that's been implemented.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and then one last thing before we move on to the next question. There's also what I see in terms of our allegiance to Israel, and this is all like strategic, is there's also they use kind of post-Holocaust sentiment to then say like, oh, if you're speaking out against Israel, you must be anti-Semitic, you must, be a Nazi, whatever it may be. They go full bore when it's like, no, like we are talking about bombing or murdering children here. We're not talking about, something different. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that as well.
yeah, I think it is an unfortunate severe example of gaslighting, where if a point is brought up that is inconvenient for someone who's arguing on the side of what Israel's been doing, or some of their other behaviors in the world stage, and like you said, you bring something up that's inconvenient for their stance, then they can just pull that out, and that's like the trump card, no pun intended. So it's a conversation disabler.
Right.
There's not retorts often provided when you bring up some of the horrible stuff they're doing.
No,
Yeah.
I've never, I don't know if that is a term you've heard, like conversation disabler. I love that because they use it so that you can just, like, how are you supposed to respond to that, right? Even though it's irrelevant to what we're actually talking about, right? I mean, they've gone as far as taking college students off off campuses if they write like an op-ed that disagreed with Israel. Like go ahead.
That's a great point. And, I saw some pretty rough stuff on that point. When all this was first popping off and Israel was really hitting Palestine hard, there was millionaires spending money on defamation campaigns against college students who were speaking out. And this is another one that I think is an unfortunate truth, is some of these guys that have a dual allegiance play a part in big institutions like Ivy League schools. And this is part of the narrative control thing, is if you have students who are speaking out against the war crimes being committed, and they're trying to raise awareness of what's going on and really push against it, and then they get told by someone who's a funder to the university, if you keep talking about this, you're going to be gone. We're going to remove you from the campus or whatever, because now they use things like the Holocaust card and whatever else to justify, like I said, stopping the conversation. And so, if you have institutions that are churning out some of the top legal people, some of the top political people, some of the top finance people, et cetera, and these are power roles, and the ones who have these opinions are being removed from those environments, who's gonna run the system going forward? It's going to be all people who are on the agenda, or at least people who are afraid to speak out against the agenda. Right.
And like, I just don't think that's ever good for any institution. Like, what I want, if I ever own a business, I want people who actively disagree with me to push me to make me better. We seem to be moving towards a loyalist stage where it's not about, no, let's get a group of diverse opinions so we can come up with the best solution. It's just, no, like, I believe this, we're just going to push the narrative. We're not even going to follow necessarily facts or science or anything like that. We're just going to push this down your throat. And that's part of authoritarianism. And I think that's some of what we're seeing. But like I want us to parse a little bit of the difference now between like Israel's leadership and like Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli people, because I think often that's conflated in media, sometimes unintentionally, I think sometimes intentionally. So can you, unpack that a little bit, the difference between like Netanyahu and the leadership versus the Israeli people?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I don't want to give off the sense that I know a ton about their political system, but what I do know is that there are a lot of people within Israel who are very frustrated and angry about what's going on. Netanyahu is a part of what I believe is called the Likud party, and they're kind of the right wing over there. And it seems that part of what's going on is that he and his party tend to have more nationalistic and expansionist policies and ideologies. And he was being investigated for corruption type charges. And so I don't know where they were at in the legal situation, but some people believe that that's part of why all this is going down, is that this is a big distraction to basically halt that legal process so that he can't be removed from power, because it's like I think a lot of governments have policies like this. Like if we're in a major war, we won't go through the normal transition of power, right?
Yeah, there was something with that with Ukraine and Russia as
Mhm.
well, where Zelensky's in power. And part of the talking point, it was kind of inaccurately misconstrued, but there is something in Ukraine where if you're in active warfare, they can't have elections or something to that degree. So
Right.
yeah.
So on that note, he was trying to push some kind of judicial reform, which seemingly was to make whatever he was doing go away. And so I think there's a conflict of interest where it's like you have political guys who want to keep their role, they want to keep their power. They also may have ideologies that are guiding a lot of this, which seems to be the case. And then you have the citizens who I would assume the majority of them want to have peace with their neighbors. And they have a contentious history with their neighbors. And so it's like you've got the expansionist, warlike, aggressive prime minister. And then you have the citizens who, for the most part, probably want to be left alone. And they're being represented by the guy, and it's unfortunate. And so, like you were saying, it is important to understand there's a difference there between the government leadership and the desires of the people. And we're seeing the same thing in the United States.
Yeah.
So,
I'm so glad you said that because I was actually going to kind of bring it back to domestically because I feel like in the United States, we're unfortunately very egocentric. And if we don't look at anything from like our perspectives, a lot of times we don't understand. So for instance, I won't use Donald Trump because some Republicans get offended, say Obama, whatever, whoever decided to commit an act and then someone like bombs our country or whatever, right? You wouldn't want them to sit by and do nothing. You wouldn't want them to, you would think that is an act of terror and aggression. Yet what Americans have adopted over a period of time is if that aggression is done to certain Middle East countries, particularly if they're brown people, we seem to be desensitized to that level of violence. But guys, I want like everyone to understand the citizens do not choose to go to war, right? Like if we are attacked as civilians, that would be an atrocity, right? You'd be like, oh my God, they bombed a hospital. Like, what did a kid trying to get cancer treatment have anything to do with the global conflict that's happening? But guys, that is what's happening right now in like Gaza, like those level of atrocities. But we seem to be like, some of us seem to be unable to like empathize and understand what's happening. So, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
no, you're good. You're good. And you're on point there. And I really believe that this has been something that's been in the works for a long, long time.
Yeah,
And
let's jump into that. Like, how did it like build to here, whether it's talking about Gaza or what we've seen with Iran? How did this ultimately build to kind of where, not that we haven't had things in the past like Lebanon, Iraq, Afghanistan, all of that, but
Mhm.
specifically to now, how do you think we got here?
Well, you and I talked already about some of the influence that Israel has over the United States government and some of the relationship there. But from what I've seen, it seems that there has been a long running strategy on behalf of the Israeli government to deteriorate the basically entirety of the Middle East that would oppose them. I don't know enough about some of the religious and political influence on that strategy because I've heard people talking about some of the people there want to rebuild the third temple, which I don't even quite know what that
I will
entails.
also be fully, one of the things about this show is transparency.
Yeah.
The religious component, I know there is a decree to that, like Israel's supposed to be kind of a promised peaceful land.
Mhm.
But I also am not fully, aware of the religious component. So if anyone is
Right.
more aware of that, please let us know below in the comments. But I didn't want to put you out on the island. I'm not very familiar with the religious components either.
Yeah, yeah, but so whatever the case is, whether it's a religious thing, whether it's like a strategic political thing, from what I've been seeing, they have been domino by domino knocking down any centralized nationalistic power in the Middle East that would be in opposition to them. Now, they've had a contentious relationship with most of the Middle East since their existence, and the United States has played a role in that through funding them and through providing weapons and technology and whatever. But I mean, look at, and this is how deep the propaganda runs. You were talking about, Americans kind of not being fully conscious of what's being done to these people because they're like brown people or whatever. I look at things like some of the TV shows and movies and games that we have in the United States, and I think some of that stuff plays into the subconscious programming that like makes us think, oh, these people are crazy terrorists and they're radical extremists, and so whatever's going on in these other countries, it's okay and it's justified. I think that's horrifically wrong, and that people underestimate the lengths that the political structure will go to get their populace okay with what their military agenda is. But to not go too deep into that, okay, let's hit the rewind button. What are some of the other countries that had strong central governments that were trying to unify their region and resist the Western powers? Saddam Hussein in Iraq is gone. Okay. Gaddafi in Libya is gone. Assad in Syria is gone. Okay. So to me, I don't think it's a coincidence that we're seeing all of these governments that kind of had things under rein within their national borders. People can believe what they want about what those leaders were about, but they had things under control in some manner within their borders, and now they're toppled over. And what's left? It's absolute chaos. You know what I mean? It's warring parties trying to take control of whatever is controllable within their borders. And to me, what it comes down to is Israel and their political structure does not want any competition in the Middle East. They want the surroundings of them to be warring tribal states, because then no one can stop them from what their next agenda is. And I believe part of that is border expansion. There's some people who have talked about this phenomenon of the Greater Israel Project, and that they want to control a very large portion of the Middle East for certain reasons. And it seems to check out with what's been going on.
Yeah, and I want to like note what you mentioned with a lot of those other countries and the regime changes that are taking place. You're not, and I'm glad you said this, you're not saying whatever those leaders were doing was good necessarily, but when you go into a regime change war, it historically turns out much worse. So this intervention, it leaves things in chaos, and it often leads to other terroristic, groups. It just hasn't historically, even though we keep doing it over and over again, it hasn't been a good strategy, right? You had Netanyahu for decades lying about nuclear weapons with Iran, right? That I think there's video from literally almost 30 years ago where he keeps saying it's right around the corner. It's right around the corner, yet no intelligence agency anywhere other than obviously Israeli intelligence will tell you that Iran has any nuclear weapons. But what I will say is after what just happened, they probably have more incentive now to pursue a nuclear weapon. And then I'm going to predict this right now. If they do produce one, they will then come back and say, see, they had a nuclear weapon.
Yep.
But what was the timeline, and there's always this misconstruing of facts and information. And like you said, the propaganda runs very deep. But how do you see now where we're at? It seems like tensions may have cooled off a little bit. I don't think it's going to be lasting. I don't know what your opinion is on that. But how do you see, I guess, the Middle East shaking out now the next few weeks? I don't want to go too far in the distance, but maybe the next few weeks, next few months. How do you see the Middle East kind of shaping out based on what we've seen thus far?
I really believe that they're going to be prepping for regime change in Iran. I think that's what's going to happen, and I think that's part of the reason that they did some of the strikes that they did. From what I saw, they were really targeting key personnel, and so if you can get rid of the people who were in these leadership positions, you're creating a power vacuum. It's on a micro scale what was happening when some of these other Middle East interventions were happening, where you take out the top political guys, and now who's left to take control? you got a bunch of terrorist groups or warlords or religious extremists, and I think that's what they're aiming for. And how they're going to go about it is kind of up in the air. I don't have a strong opinion on that, but I do believe that some of it is going to entail, assassinating key personnel and letting chaos reign with what follows that.
Yeah. And to that point, I don't think assassinations are off the table at all. I think in the United States, once again, because that does happen in the United States, but not as frequently as it does in a lot of other countries. So we don't understand the likelihood of something like that actually happening. So there's also been talks even about like doing kind of a false flag type operation to what is it called? Like rile up more favor for the war effort. So I don't think that's out of the question. I think they're taking a little pause. Israel meaning taking a little pause with Iran. They are continuing with Gaza. I don't want to diminish what happened in Gaza. Gaza's worse, to be clear, for what's happening there. But in terms of Iran, it seems like they're going to recalculate, and I think they're going to find a way to really put Iran as like a bigger threat to drum up enough US really support for war. And I think we're going to be in a regime change war. When that happens, I don't know. But Israel cannot be successful without the United States support in this. So if they do go full out, that means like we are also involved in that. Now, what like kind of leading into one of the final questions here then, what role, or I would argue lack of role, but how would you like to see the United States kind of, navigate its relationships in the Middle East, whether that's with, Israel and what they're doing in Gaza, Israel and what they're doing with Iran? Like what would you like to see U.S. interventionist policy be in regards to Israel?
Yeah, as far as policy, I would love to see us stop sending them any financial aid that has to do with weapons contracting, defense contracting, right? Because they use this word defense like it's offense contracting.
Right. Yeah, you're not in the defensive if you're constantly the aggressor every time and then
Right.
throw your hands up like, oh, we need help, we're being attacked. Well, yeah, like guys, other countries have pride too. You expect to bomb them and then to just do nothing? Like I don't understand that logic, but
And I mean, such a large portion of our citizens still believe it. They still believe that they're the victims and that we're not. It's like the Empire from Star Wars. Like, guys, our government and theirs are the bad guys, and we're sending stormtroopers and.
Right. It's so hard because I think this can serve as its own episode, but like in education a lot, they're acting like, in school, they're producing these crazy far left liberals when really my schooling experience, and I know we went to similar schools, was really like US was the best. And like that's what I came out of school understanding is like we are the good guys. We are not Thanos, we are Iron Man, right? That we're Captain America.
Right.
But then like as you start learning more, obviously things are more nuanced and more complicated. And yes, we may have done great strides and made great innovations, but like we've also done atrocities across the world consistently. There's a give and take because no country's also perfect with that. Go ahead.
For sure. We can talk about the meritocracy, we can talk about technology and things like that, but if you have a good heart, you care about morality, not excellence in those areas,
Yeah, it's not like in the US, you're really defined. Like one of the interesting things is one of the first things you'll ask is like, what does someone do? i.e. really, how much do you make? Like ostensibly. Yep. And it's like, I don't care. What are your values? Like, what are you about? What do you like specifically at this time we're living at? I don't care if you make $400,000. Like, how are you making society better? How are you speaking up? Like, we're at a really, and I do think young people have kind of pushed this narrative away a lot from that and are kind of more woke, you could say, whether or not you want to say that's a good or bad word. But I think they're more aware of what's going on. And I do think historically, young people always tend to lead the charge on a lot of the changes, a lot of the protests, and a lot of, specifically anti-war protests are usually led by younger people. So I do want to shout out our younger people across the country. I've been pretty in line. Like they were ahead on Gaza. Like they are, always tend to be ahead of these trends. I do agree with you though. I don't think we should send another dime to Israel. I think we've already spent way more than enough. If a country is not if Iran is not attacking us, then we do not need to be involved with what is happening there, in my opinion, unless there are war crimes, which would likely be done by Israel, which technically we should prosecute Israel. I know that will not happen, in this world, but that's where I stand. And I do think because we have technology now and because we're seeing what's happening in Gaza, I saw a video the other day, like a building's blown up and then there's like a child walking through. It's like, there's no, how are you going to defend that? Right. And I think, it's sad we've had to see all of this, like that it's recorded, but it's also great that it's documented so that, you can't hide in the shadows as much anymore. But go ahead.
And real quick note, if anyone watching this has any questions about, whether or not we're wrong for questioning the military and the government going after Iran and whatnot, and thinking, oh, well, what if they're a threat to us? And look at a map, and see how disinterested in that country we should be. Okay, that's one point. And two, if you say, oh, well, look at the terrorism that has happened in the terrorist attacks, how do people get radicalized? A lot of people get radicalized because they see what we've been doing, what our country and military have been doing in their surroundings, the entire Middle East, for the past however many years. We've been giving them a ton of reasons to be radicalized. So that's when they talk about radical extremists, what is the difference between a radical extremist and a radicalized extremist? And how does that person get radicalized? So anyways.
No, that is a great point. I actually made that point in a previous episode about how okay, guys, if we are cutting aid to countries like in Africa, and now you have parents whose children are starving to death, you don't think that's going to create extreme, like that stuff, that geopolitical, that level of foreign affairs, I don't think this administration considers at all, like the long-term impacts of just building up hatred towards the United States. Like that's not going to play well long-term. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Another thing I want to mention, I was writing some notes as you were talking, is like the state of journalism just sucks in the United States. Like I did go to college originally for journalism at University of Maryland, and everything I'm seeing basically universally on news networks is not journalism. It's about hot takes. It's about propaganda. It's why, even more than our failing education system, I think our failing journalism ecosystem is really problematic. And when you pair those two things, so we have kind of a failing education system in general, so people aren't able to critically think and necessarily understand that they're being propagandized. And then you have a media infrastructure, a mainstream media infrastructure that really feeds that, not to mention social media and all that. So it's just a really toxic stew. But I wanted to mention just the terrible state of journalism before we move to our final question here. And thank you so much for joining. I think you've done a great job for someone who said, oh, I'm not that knowledgeable. I think you're definitely more knowledgeable than the average American for sure on this. But this is a question I'm going to start asking every guest that I have on, just to kind of get a pulse of the country here. And this doesn't have to be foreign affairs or foreign policy related, but if there is one policy change, you can executive order it, authoritarian style. It doesn't have to go through Congress or anything. What is one, and it doesn't have to be super specific, but what is one policy change you would like to see in the United States if you could only have one?
One policy change I'd like to see in the United States. Okay. I'm trying to be practical here.
You can also give me one that's like pie in the sky, will never happen, and one that you legitimately think could happen.
Okay, let's go pie in the sky first.
Okay.
Pie in the sky first is technologically, I don't think it should be that difficult for us to kind of bypass the representative democracy and have the average citizen be able to vote on just about any issue in their state or on a federal level.
So okay. No, I get what you're saying. Basically, we're at a stage with technology that you don't need representatives. We could actually be like I guess, full-fledged democracy to a farther degree by having individuals vote. Obviously, you would have to think through security concerns, but I don't mind that. I don't know what the efficiency looks like, but I like that. I like that pie in the sky idea. And I don't like, who would disagree with that also? Like, wouldn't you want, all right, we're going to set the minimum wage. Like, okay, bet. I want to go ahead and vote on that. I don't want some random representative who may have taken APAC money who now that's really cool. Like you said, that's pie in the sky. I don't know if that's our lifetime thing, but
100% pie in the sky. I do think it would really give some interesting personality to the states, even more so than they have now, as far as like, hey, you want to live a different experience in the United States? We have all of these different policies over here because we got to vote on them, not because our representatives got to choose them. And
that's very interesting because the United States also is much bigger than other countries. So like if you go to Europe, you can travel to dozens of countries relatively easily and get that different experience. But in the United States, I love New Orleans, for instance. That's one of my favorite cities. Love that. But it's a lot of copy and paste. It's a lot of kind of the same thing. So I like that from just a flavor standpoint. Do you have one that's a little more realistic that you think could actually go through?
More realistic is, and I don't have a super concrete understanding of how this process works, but from what I've heard, it would make more sense to have what they call line item voting. So when they're passing bills in Congress and in the Senate and whatever, a lot of times they'll get a bill that's like, from what I've heard, hundreds to thousands of pages long. And they'll get it delivered and they'll be like, hey, you have 24 hours to review this and then vote. And you're voting like a yes or a no, but it's on 50 different subject matters. So it's mischievous, dude. It's like, hey, let's say we're going to pass a bill called the More Money for All Americans bill, and then there's one part in there that increases some kind of tax or something like that, or it sends more money to another country or whatever. So that
No, that is, I don't know if that's number one for me, but that is, you're 100% right. I've had so many discussions because it also leaves the public confused. So you don't even know, okay, what they did great was they voted on $15 minimum wage like during Biden. So for instance, Kristen Sinema had to get up there, and I don't know if you know how much you know about this, but basically Kristen Sinema, she was a Democrat. She went up there, she voted no, basically showed her to the world, and now she was primary and she's not there anymore in California.
Okay.
So you need to have individual votes, freaking put them on television, make it clear. I would even do it like a sport where each, like, this is your representative here. They are voting on should you have clean water. No. Okay, cool. Because that's some of the stuff people are voting on, but the bigger bills are constructed so excuses can be made, right?
It gives them it gives them an escape from accountability because they can say, oh, I had to choose between the lesser of two evils.
Yeah.
If I voted no on this bill, then we wouldn't have clean water. So I had to vote yes, even though it sent however million or $1 billion elsewhere for a war.
Yeah, no, I love both of those ideas. I hope one of them, that second one, I think could happen. If that first one happens, we would be in an amazing situation. But Sean, thank you so much, man, for joining me. I really, really appreciate it. And I would definitely like to have you on again. If this is a topic you feel like, you're not as well abreast to, I would love to talk to you more about one you are knowledgeable about. But once again, man, thank you. And I appreciate the time.
Sure thing. Thanks, Timmy. I appreciate you having me on. And keep fighting the fight, man. It's good stuff.
Thank you. Appreciate it. So that wraps up my interview there with Sean. I hope you guys did enjoy kind of hearing our perspective on what is happening in the Middle East and the relationship between America and Israel and the role ultimately we have played in influencing the Middle East and the role that Israel has played in influencing, America and our American political system. Now, our shout of the week, guys, is going to go to an Instagram page. So get your phone out if you want something fun to follow. This Instagram page is called Diaper Diplomacy. And it's one of the best pages if you need a little laugh and break from all the chaos and drama. And I have recently come across it, guys, and dropped a little follow, and they do not miss with their kind of AI baby generated videos and pictures. So I'm actually going to play a little clip of Donald Trump babyfied from the Diaper Diplomacy Instagram page, and this one was him dropping the F-bomb in regards to the Israel-Iran ceasefire.
But I'm really unhappy if Israel's going out this morning because the one rocket that didn't land, that was shot, perhaps by mistake, that didn't land. I'm not happy about that. You know what? We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what they're doing. Do you understand that?
So if you found that little clip as funny as I did, make sure you give Diaper Diplomacy a follow on Instagram. They don't just have Trump, guys. They have AOC, Bernie, JD Vance, Mitch McConnell, Kamala Harris. I think I saw Lauren Boebert on there. They just have all different people from the political space. And I think that is a fun kind of positive use of AI versus some of the weirder, more, hateful ways we have seen AI used. Now, guys, I will finish it off here with today's vibes. And I'm going to throw it a little bit to Taylor Swift here. And I'm going to do the 10-minute version of All Too Well. I think that's one of the best songs she's ever done. So the 10-minute version of All Too Well, if you guys got some time, sit back and watch that. I'm going to head over and check out actually the music video version of that now. Thank you for watching and being part of a growing progressive community. Please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And if you have the time, check out some of my other episodes you can see around me. Thank you.